Hi, everyone. I think I'm going to get started now. Um, First off, I want to thank you all for taking an interest in our study, Spark at Yale, and spending part of your afternoon here listening in. If you were at the keynote speech earlier on about our online community and our distance socializing efforts through Casey, uh, and this is the research talk that I was talking about, I was referring to earlier on. So uh, it's great to be able to talk about both of these things. Most people, when they think about research and community, it seems to sound like separate entities. Um, but I'm going to say that they are not, certainly not mutually exclusive, because really at the end of the day, we all are working very hard for similar things. And those similar things are improved quality of life for folks on the autism spectrum, and even, take it a step further, uh, improved quality of lifespan. So not just for a certain age group, but in different stages of somebody's life. So in order to get there, we need a lot of knowledge, quality knowledge. And uh, the way we get quality knowledge is through science and research. So it's probably something that you've heard over and over again, especially in these days, days of the pandemic. But this is a sort of a principle that rings true regardless of what the challenges are. So because we need these things, that sort of leads to the title of this talk. Why does autism research need you, including Spark at Yale, um, needs everyone, you know, who it's designed to benefit because we can get the best knowledge to improve outcomes for individual lives. So let me move forward here. Uh, So some of you have probably participated in different research studies in the past. And this is a lot different from a lot of other studies. And throughout this talk, you'll sort of understand why. Um, but how I've come to see Spark at Yale as a research study is it's more of a research community. So vital part of that community, are families uh, who are going to benefit from the work that's being done. So it is more of a collaboration, and with a collaboration, there's people working towards a common goal, which we've discussed is at the end of the day a quality of lifespan. And in the process of reaching these common goals, there are benefits for everybody that's involved. So I'm going to go through some of uh, the things I think are really nice for our community at Spark at Yale. Uh, so when you participate in the study, you join a national community. And in the keynote talk, I did emphasize, the importance of community. And this is not just local community. So your neighbors, friends, family, this is a national community. So across the United States and even around the world, people are uh, working together, for a common cause. So we're uniting our efforts. And all of this is to enhance knowledge. So the saying, knowledge is power, I think applies here. Um, the more the more you can act and more accurately you can act, to improve lives, not only for those who are here now, but for people who are in the future. So if you think about the kind of information you need, you know, this might put it in perspective. So more than about 3.5 million Americans live with autism. And when you're dealing with populations that are large and very diverse, uh, you need more than just a couple hundred or even 1,000 people to help out. We're talking more on the orders of hundreds of thousands of people. And that's what we mean by quality data, is that the data in the research has to reflect the people that it's supposed to help. So the more you understand about the people who it's supposed to help, the better the data is to help predict what's most helpful. So that's the knowledge part. And there's a third part of Amazon gift cards. I think that's self-explanatory. There's a gift card up to $50 for the initial completion of the study, which is a saliva sample and some surveys. But there's also other surveys, which I'll discuss a little later, that may have some kind of incentive. Number 4, when you're part of a research community, you get direct access to the discoveries that come with doing that research. So part of the discovery is related to autism genes, but there's a large part of Spark that is not related to genetics, and that's through the surveys that are very much relevant to everyday life. So a lot of people working across the country, are working on this information, and the result of that is a lot of research, and want to also say that because there's so many people participating, privacy is a very serious issue that's taken very seriously. So all the information that people will give, is de-identified. So people might see the information, but they don't know who it belongs to. And I'll talk about that a little bit later too. There's a possibility to receive a genetic report. So if there's a genetic change related to autism, then you'll be given a report and genetic counseling to help interpret what the report means. Right now, this is on the order of 10%. So right now, about 10% of people may receive a report of genetic findings. And this is sort of a bit of a moving target, because as new genes are discovered, the list gets updated over time with the newest knowledge. But if there's a match between the participant and the identified genes, then they will receive a report. So it may not be this year, maybe next year. This is a study that's gone on for like over 5 years now. So we expect that that number will continue to grow. And the sixth part is receiving personalized reports. So this comes from a lot of the surveys that you may be invited to complete. All of this is optional, which I'll explain later. But you get feedback, and part of participating and being in a community is that there's some degree of feedback and interaction. So it's not that you complete the surveys or you participate and then you don't really hear back from the other party. This is a little bit different in that there's ongoing surveys if you choose to participate in them, and there's an opportunity to get feedback on how your response is compared to others that completed the survey. Okay, so that is, after that's out of the way, we're going to just take a few steps back. Especially at this day and age, I think it's really important to clarify what is scientific research, and we'll definitely go into what exactly is Spark. So scientific research is a learning and sharing process. And what that means is that the way we learn, is through sharing information. So it's not just one-sided, meaning that it's not that the participants of a research study, are sort of donating all of their information and data, and then you never hear back from them. I think part of what's great here is that being part of this study, you get to feel a process where you're giving the information, and receiving feedback on the information. So whether that be from the genetic study that the saliva samples are for, or it's from the surveys, so it's this give and take, uh, data is analyzed, and it's shared back with the community. The other point is that good research takes a lot of time. So the bigger the question or the more complex the question, the more time that it may take. So good research tends to take longer time. And that's really important because if the results of the research are going to be used to influence or impact lives, then you need to be very sure, that your results are truly closest to the truth as possible. Third point, research begins by asking a question. So this is in line with the scientific method in that we have a question, something that is of relevance, something that is of importance, uh, and which the answer, is tractable. So we're able to reasonably find an answer to that, and really what drives all the questions is, asking this, so what question is like, why is studying this important? Um, so the best research questions, can be really address that question very well. So what does this research do? How does it impact me? How does it impact my family? You know, if something makes a difference, a positive difference in life, then that's generally the marks of a good research question. All right, so um, fourth point, data are collected to help answer the question. So this is part of I was talking about earlier, is that you have a question, but you've got a large community, and uh, everyone in the community is a unique person, so the point that if you have 3.5 million people living with autism, and you're only going to uh, get information from a couple thousand, you know, how are you so sure that, that couple thousand is really going to impact, all of 3.5 million people, So especially when we know that uh, everybody's so very different. So the more data, the better we can get to the truth, and uh, having data, that actually applies to, the people that you're trying to help. Not just some people you're trying to help, but as many people as possible. Um, and the data after the analysis is then shared back with community members, practitioners, or anyone that is assisting in the care of individuals on the spectrum. Now, in terms of Spark, research data is gathered in two main ways. There's a saliva sample collection, which that is used for DNA analyses. And then you have the surveys, so you have kind of the biological or sort of objective data, via DNA analysis, and then you have surveys, or questions that get to things that may be more everyday or, in line with somebody's everyday challenges, and that really ranges in terms of what that is, which is why uh, this is a study that is ongoing with a lot of people working on it. So those are the two ways that data comes in for Spark. Um, and probably most important, and I've alluded to in the past, is that research is really an opportunity for individuals and families to be represented in science, and making sure that the information that's generated from that data, actually helps the people um, who it's trying to help. So I think a good way to think about this is back in the really old days, a lot of research was done for men. and male subjects were the norm, and all of the information or data gathered from that was applicable to men, but was it applicable to women? And the answer is no. Uh, and the reason why they didn't have that data back then is because they weren't recruiting for that. So the data for women, was based. The recommendations for women were based on the research done in men. So this is not what we're trying to repeat here. Is that we want the information that we gain from research to represent as much as possible, the diversity of our community. So what's Spark? Well, the mission is very simple, and I think we probably mentioned this several times already. But it really is to advance understanding of autism and to improve lives. So it's part of that so what question as why is this worth all the effort? Well, if you can improve lives, then it makes everything worthwhile. So you improve lives by understanding, and also you can accelerate how you learn and understand things. So part of the design of this study and the reason why it's so large is because it's trying to get at these two things. It's trying to get at understanding, more comprehensive understanding, and to make sure the results come to us sooner rather than later. So the goal is to recruit, and engage about 50,000 trios. So let me tell you what a trio is. It basically is a person living with autism and both biological parents. And families enrolled in the study online, and they share medical and behavioral information through surveys and saliva sample for DNA analysis. So it's pretty simple, and it's something that people don't always understand in terms of how easy it is to participate, because it's quite unlike other studies they've experienced before. All right, and I'm going to go into detail on these items later on in the talk. Okay, so this is a question that I think is very important, and it's it may not be as intuitive, but I'm going to explain it here. So how will Spark speed up autism research? So it's important really to understand that people with autism, just like any other human being, have lots of differences from each other. And these differences can impact, how people respond to treatment or what kind of interventions they may need or what kind of things they may be at risk for. So the issue here is that if you have a diverse population of people, if you just can't mix them all together, take the average of what you're measuring in that population and expect that it's going to apply to everybody. So the way that Spark deals with this is by large numbers. And in this case, here it says 50,000 families with ASD. You're collecting information via surveys and genetic info. And to me, this sounds very familiar. This is very much like precision medicine. If people are familiar with that notion, it's relatively new. But what you're doing in precision medicine, is that you're identifying other ways, where people are similar, and you're going to group them in a way for research so that the research results apply best to the people that share that characteristic. And the example here is, if you've got, say, different genetic markers for autism, that is one way, that you can predict or you can study populations, in a way that the results, will likely impact or likely be accurate for those who have that genetic marker. So the example here is that you've got these different colors here, and if you mix them all up, the information you're going to get may not be truly reflective of any one person in there, right? But say that you have them in different research groups based on a certain characteristic. In this case, maybe some kind of a genetic difference, or maybe some kind of a measurable or observable difference, right? Then the data that they contribute, will likely be more accurate for the people who share that thing in common. So it's a little bit, it's a little complicated, but that really is the idea. Is that if you can parse out diverse populations, and this sort of goes in general, not just for autism, but for human beings. If you're able to parse them out into different research groups, then those findings of that research can more accurately be applied to the people or population who have that characteristic in common. All right, so a few misconceptions that we hear a lot about. With the idea of genetics, some people are concerned, that this is in some way looking for a cure for autism, and can't emphasize enough that it's really not looking for a cure at all. Really, as I've explained, it's looking for effective research and effective quality knowledge, that you can apply to folks who are very diverse. And with genetic studies, there's always a possibility that genetic tests be made, but this is not the purpose of Spark. And it's not that anybody can just participate in Spark as a researcher. So all research projects are vetted by a committee. So I'll talk about that a little bit later too. So two main myths: not looking for a cure and not developing genetic tests for autism. One other common misconception is about 10% of folks who participate will get a genetic result. It's not everybody, and the reason for that is that a lot of the genetic knowledge, hasn't been discovered yet. So right now, about 10% of the people are contacted because one of their genes matches the autism genes that have been discovered. We expect that this is going to increase with time as more genes are discovered. All right, so this is, I think, another very important topic about Spark. So research requires a lot of quality information from different people. We're talking on the orders of hundreds of thousands. You're asking hundreds of thousands of people to share information about themselves. Therefore, how you secure that information is of paramount importance. And I'm going to sum this up in this slide, which I think is very effective. So when you participate in Spark, first off, there is a process by which you set up an account. So even starting from a sufficiently secure password, the system is very careful about making sure that passwords chosen by participants are adequately secure. So that's probably the first thing you may notice when you sign up. Now, when you input the information, it's stored in a secure database. So secure databases, there's lots of different technical rules of what constitutes a secure database. One of which is encrypting data. So what that means is the data is translated into a different code so that you can't directly access or decipher what the data means. in order to decipher it, you have to have proper permissions, uh, which then can convert the code back into the data. So all this information is secured in an encrypted database. Um, on top of that, your data, well, there's all different kinds of data. There's more clinical data, which say you're rating anxiety or depression, right? And then there's data that are personally identifying, like your birthday, your first and last name, your address. Uh, Now, all personally identified, all personally identifying information is stripped from this other data. And therefore, anybody who accesses, researchers that access the data will never know who it actually belongs to. What they will know is just the ratings, but they won't know who did the ratings, and that's part of where the safety comes in, is that you're dealing with large volumes of data. You need to make sure that any one person can't be identified by the data that's being shared across researchers. And top of that, not just any researcher can access this data. There's definitely a vetting process. There has to be scientifically valid purposes. So some of the fears that this information may be misused, is you should, that is protected, by a committee that approves research studies that are going to query the database. Spark holds a certificate of confidentiality from the NIH, basically that prohibits anyone accessing the data without the participant's consent. So the only way that people can link the data to you is you have to consent for it. And the certificate of confidentiality is a protection. Uh, Now, Spark will inform participants of what other research studies they may be eligible for. So part of being in the community is you tell the community what is it that you're interested in learning, the kind of things, questions that are most important to you, the kind of research studies that are most interesting, and the system will attempt to match you to research studies that interest you the most. And of course, this is all optional, so you can opt out of anything pretty much at any time. So even if you sign up for Spark, at any time you can remove your information from the community. So it really is a completely voluntary thing, and it's designed to be as user friendly as possible. All right, so this is getting to some of the so what questions. So uh, what has Spark learned using what they already have? So Spark has been around for about 5 years, over 5 years now. And some of the earlier studies have been quite fruitful. So I'm just going to go over some of this here so people get an idea of what's possible. Um, so I think this is probably common knowledge for everybody. ASD is both genetic and environmental. Okay, so these percentages here are concordance rates. So basically, the first example is if you have identical twins, then there's a 77% chance that both will have autism. Fraternal twins, it's about 31%, and siblings about 20%. So this is clearly speaks to some genetic factors, but you can't rule out environmental factors. But regardless, I think that knowing about the genetics, really helps us understand what the contributors are. And I think the more striking example of this is you roll back the clock to the 1950s when people really didn't know why autism, didn't understand autism at all, much less figure out what the contributors are. So you've all heard about the refrigerator mother hypotheses. Obviously that has been debunked. And part of that discrediting is due to science. So science has helped uh, clarify a lot of these myths, that have been uh, quite damaging to families. So it is a very broad statement to say, autism is genetic and environmental. And I think that this slide characterizes some of the complexity here. So regardless of whether it's genetic or environmental, you have some overlap or combination, you know, of these things, and in different people, it may be different combinations, So on the environmental side, you have things like pollution or maybe some kind of illness during pregnancy. I think the viral condition is commonly cited. Those are just a couple of few examples. And on the genetic side, you have things that are inherited and things that are de novo. You and you have combined interactions. So things that happen when two things are present, that would not be predicted if you considered each of them just individually. So when we say autism is genetic, and I think this is uh, something that's worth clarifying, uh, it doesn't necessarily mean it's inherited. And that's the difference between inherited and de novo changes. So in I think everyone knows what inherited means. Inherited means that the gene was sort of passed along. It was pre-existing, existed already in one of the biological parents, or maybe both of the biological parents, and then that genetic difference is passed on to a child, who then expresses that gene. But this is not very common. In fact, um, what we're finding is in a lot of the Spark studies is that a lot of these changes are de novo. And what's meant by de novo changes is that they are new, meaning that they didn't exist prior in either parent, but they exist in the person with autism. Uh, so this is nothing that's abnormal. You De novo mutations occur all the time. So every time DNA is replicated, say like in sperm cells, where there's a high level of replication, there's going to be some uh, difference in translating or copying that code, you know, and that difference is sort of gives rise to these de novo changes, which can occur anywhere in the genome. If it occurs in an autism-related gene, then that may confer a contribution to autism. All right. So, uh, like I said, Spark has been around for about 5 years. So if you're hearing this for the first time, I think this is an interesting animation. Is to see how many families or how many people have contributed to this study. Uh, so you're seeing like hundreds of thousands of individuals, all across the United States. And of all these folks, about 10% of families receive a genetic result. And again, we expect that to grow over time as new genes are discovered. And the genetic analyses have increased the number of genes that we know are linked to autism. But there's so much more to learn, which is why we need your help. Now, Yale itself, as a site, has so far over about 368 families we have at Spark at Yale. And that consists of 55 independent adults who are on the spectrum and 444 children and dependent adults who are on the spectrum. And with all this, we've learned a few very important things. First off, Spark has identified 27 new genes linked to autism. And this idea of de novo changes. So not that all autism is necessarily heritable, but de novo changes or new changes that are not present in the parent but the person with autism account for as much as 20 to 30% of the genetic contribution. Uh, Now, the research currently suggests that this is a bit of the tip of an iceberg. You know, we have some genes identified, but there are still several hundred of genes that are thought to be linked to autism. And this is the reason why when we ask people to participate, uh, that the study is very inclusive. We have a diverse population. We want to make sure people are represented. You know, with hundreds of genes, you have tons of variety. Uh, and therefore, in order to learn about that and get quality information to help people, we need on orders of tens of thousands of families to participate. All right, so returning genetic results. This is something that is of interest to a lot of families, uh, but not all, which I think is important to emphasize, because uh, even though there is a genetic component, not everyone's interested in the genetic component. So we'll talk about that a little later. All right, so this is a list of the genes or genetic changes so far that have been known to be linked with autism. This is the Spark gene list. So about 5 years of research, with so many people who have already participated, this gene list consists of about 153 genes and 19 copy number variants. And we expect this list to be even uh, even bigger. We expect that again several hundreds of genes may be involved, but that's part of the ongoing research with Spark. Now, the process works in a very uh, stringent way in that there is a genetics committee who does review all of the data, and the committee approves which genes are new, and that dictates uh, who or what families get the results. So it's going to be something that is carefully vetted by a community of experts. So if there is a result, then it's something that's fairly certain, in terms of being a genetic contributor. Uh, but remember, it's also lots of other things that determine whether uh, somebody has autism. It's multiple genes. It's the environment. So because of that, if you get a genetic result, there is genetic counseling that's connected to that. So it's really to make sure that people understand the data that they're being returned, and are able to make informed decisions if any changes are needed. So it really is, I believe, a very certain way that people get the information that they want, accurately and responsibly. And just because there's a genetic component to this study doesn't mean that everyone is obligated to get a genetic result. And this is part of the consenting process. So you can participate in Spark. You can give a genetic sample through the saliva, uh, but you can opt out of receiving a genetic result. So this is an example of the opt-out screen, which you can either say you do or you don't. And it's all customizable. So if you don't want any kind of genetic result, then you can opt out of all genetic results. So, as part of, the analysis of the genetic information, uh, certain genes are screened. So if there is a genetic change or difference that could lead to something that impacts somebody's life, in terms of what they call it, life-saving results. You know, you can opt out of autism-related results, but opt in with the life-saving, potentially life-saving results. But you can also opt out of that too. And this is what that screen shows you, is that you can opt out of the autism and the results are potentially life-saving. So really the control is in the participant's hands. Now this is an example of some of the information that is shared, if a genetic finding is confirmed. So this particular example is FOXP1 related syndrome. And it's written in a way that's designed to be accessible, user-friendly, a little easier on the eyes, relevant information in a concise manner. And there's multiple examples of this. This is just one. All right, so moving on. So this is what we discussed a little bit earlier. Actually, the first slide, I think we may have emphasized a lot of these things. So I'll go into a little more detail. So what does Spark give back to participants? So this is a community, and the community is involved, and people get feedback. So people want to know, how what their community is like. So, and this is some basic information. So if you're participating in Spark, then you may get a breakdown. You get a breakdown of, who's actually participating in Spark. This example shows you how many kids are participating, how many adults with autism are participating. And it gives like a little interpretation or description of why this is important. So in this case, it's saying many more children with autism have enrolled than adults. Therefore, there's a lot of encouragement for adults to enroll in the study. There's also statistics on ratio of males to females over 18, ratio of males to females under 18, and some recommendation or interpretation of this. And you also learn about other things like what's the age breakdown, or how many people are in sort of early adulthood versus middle adulthood, maybe later adulthood. So these are sort of very interesting things that you can glean from the Spark website if you're part of the community. All right. So this is getting back to the surveys. When you are part of the community, you will select preferences on studies you might be interested in or certain topics. And then you'll be contacted or invited to participate in a survey. If you participate in a survey, then some of these surveys will feed back results. So say when the survey study is done, then you may get a result of how you answered questions compared to the rest of the Spark community who has participated. And being part of this community means that you're part of, I guess you're in the loop, so to speak. And I think this is a good illustration of how an iterative process, helps everybody in the community. So Spark, is a lot of researchers who are part of Spark. They, in addition to Spark Central, may propose studies. Then they contact community members who have designated some interest in different kinds of studies. Community members are invited, and then they are able to decide, whether or not they want to participate. And that participation, leads to new findings, which is then analyzed by Spark and then relayed back to the community. So I think this loop is important to understand when we think about why is it important to participate in research. And the importance is that, you know, if you have a group of people who is not part of the process, then their information is sort of missing from the research. And when their information is missing from the research, then the results of that research may not apply as well to them. So um, we need everybody, to participate, if we're going to develop research, if we're going to have discovery, that benefits everybody. So representation from everyone is extremely important. And I think this loop tells you why, because in this process, you make adjustments, based on what people are telling you and what you're learning from people, So if your voice is not heard, or say if your data is not heard in this case, then the information or the findings will be less applicable to you. All right, so going back to how data, this is part of the security steps that Spark takes, is not just any researcher can participate in Spark. People actually have to apply, and the application process, it's a formal process, and it's reviewed by a committee. So there's a participant access committee, and this committee is also representative of the entire community. So you'll see that includes researchers, includes clinicians, representatives from the autism committee, which includes parents, independent adults with autism. So all the stakeholders you have are weighing in to which studies can move forward and which ones should not. That's really important when we're doing responsible research in a way that is aligned with the goals of everybody involved, especially the families and people on the spectrum. Studies are evaluated based on merit, integrity, community engagement interests, alignment with SPARK goals. So there is a additional protection on who can actually be part of this in terms of accessing data and answering research questions. All right. So how much time we got left here? So this goes back to why it's important for a lot of people to participate. So there are so many issues or challenges here that are of interest to a lot of different people. So the Stephen Shore quote, "You met one person with autism, you met one person with autism," is very relevant here. Is because not everybody has issues with sleep and diet. Not everybody has communication, different kinds of, well, people have different kinds of communication challenges. It's not all the same. Challenging behaviors, gender differences, parenting issues. So, in order to get traction on all of these things, and this is just a partial list. I mean, theoretically, there's sort of an infinite list of things, that are of interest to different people in the community. But if you just have 100 people participating, you're never going to get answers to these questions. So in order to get great answer, quality data that generates solid evidence, to influence recommendations, you need on the orders of hundreds of thousands. So imagine if you have hundreds of thousands of people, contributing to all of the issues that are identified by the community as being important. You can find your answers in a lot of different kind of answers, very efficiently. So these are some things that a SPARK community member may be asked to participate in. And on the right hand here, there is a example of an email invitation. So if there's a match between your interest in a specific research study, then you'll get an email invitation that looks kind of like this. Mental health needs and service status of young adults with autism. This is just one example. So what the email will basically introduces you to the study, what it's about, why it's important, and gives you an estimate about how much time it would take to complete the study, and if there's an incentive involved in completing the study. In this example, it looks like you can get a $20 Amazon gift code via email. So all this information will be in the notification uh, of the invitation to participate. So you can either opt in or opt out. And of course, all of it is completely optional. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground. I do want to clarify, that this is a different kind of research project. Again, it's very much I see it more of a partnership. Again, everybody here is aligned along a common goal. We're all working hard to improve quality of life. In that process of working together, there are some great things, that are available for participants. So one is sort of joining this national sport community. So this is all across America, and today over 90,000 individuals are part of Spark. And if you think about sort of the broader community, it looks like over 200,000 total. So that's a very large group of people. You participate in enhancing knowledge. So knowledge is power. So the more knowledge we have, the more accurate it is, the more high quality the data is, the quicker that we can get to the questions that mean the most to individuals and families. Now there's the Amazon gift card, which you've mentioned, and being part of the community means that you're in the know. So research results that are a result of the community's participation is shared back with the community. And when you're part of the community, then you'll be in the loop and receiving any new research results. There's a possibility to receive a genetic report. Again, this is on the order of 10% now, because not all autism-related genes are known. We think that this number will increase as more genes are identified. But it's important to realize that just because you don't get a result now, or just because you don't get a result next year, doesn't mean that you'll never get a result. The only thing that really means is that the genetic sample doesn't match any of the autism genes that are identified. But since that changes based on the latest research, people can be contacted years ago who have participated because a new gene was discovered. So it's definitely important to keep in mind. And this is not just about getting a result. A result is only meaningful if you really understand what it means, or you understand its significance. So if there's a genetic result that's reported, then it will come with genetic counseling. So people aren't just sort of left guessing of what exactly it means. And finally, with the genetics part, is that not everybody wants to know the genetic result, and that's totally fine. And because there's enough people who want to participate, they want to contribute to the science, but they're less interested in knowing what their genetic result is, then they can actually opt out of those things. All right, and finally, receive personalized reports. So this is part of, you can almost see this as a journey, so in the quest for quality knowledge to improve quality of life, there's a lot of surveys that are involved if you choose that you want to participate in them. And not just surveys that are existing now, but since this is an ongoing project, there will be more, in the future, and some of those surveys, you will get feedback once the surveys are completed, how your responses compare to all the other families who have answered the survey. Okay. And this last point sort of goes to the notion that unlike a lot of studies that have very strict inclusion, exclusion criteria, they carefully screen out who and who can't participate. SPARC is perhaps the most inclusive study, in my experience, that I've encountered, in that there's really not this strict process to determine who and who can't participate. It's very, very inclusive. I mean, basically, you have to have a past professional autism diagnosis. Have to live in the United States. Since the consents are in English, then one of the requirements right now is that people are English speaking. And let's see here, even if you are an adult with autism and you don't want your parents to participate, then that's fine. You can participate on your own. And it's very sort of permissive in that way, is that even though the trios, as I was talking about later, are important to the genetic studies, so that is the person with autism and both biological parents, you can participate in any way you like, in any way you're comfortable. So if a parent and one child wants to participate, then that's fine too. Or if just an adult wants to participate, that's also fine. There's a lot of ways to be involved in the study. And I should also add that sort of in this pandemic era, when a lot of things are going virtual, including SPARC has always been a bit of had this virtual flair to it. So what I mean by that is no longer do you have to physically go into, say, a clinic or a medical center to participate in SPARC. You can participate in SPARC strictly by being at home and online. So all the consenting, all of the questionnaires, all of the sort of data inputs are done online, with the exception, of course, of the saliva sample, which the workaround with that is that if you participate, then you're mailed a small box that contains a saliva sample tube. And you literally just fill the tube, it's actually a very small amount of saliva, and you mail back the box. So you can do this completely at home, contact-free. However, it's not the only way you can do it. So for people who want to come in and schedule an appointment, or people who want support over the phone, or in this day and age, people who want support via teleconferencing, like Zoom, or email support, or pretty much, I believe, I didn't say home visits. So home visits are also feasible. So the flexibility of participating is really like no other study, and the reason why we spend time talking about this is because it does look quite different from a lot of studies, and we want everyone to know that it is as user-friendly as possible. Okay, so that concludes the presentation. I want to thank everybody for listening. And again, this is all recorded, so whether you're live streamed with us now, or you want to watch it later on, there's a lot of information. You can access this online. At any time, you can contact us via email, sparkforautism@yale.edu, or telephone 203-785-7539. Now, you can also visit us online. Actually, you can even sign up online by using this URL, www.sparkforautism.org/Yale. And there's also a lot of information online about the study as well. So if you have any questions, please either email or you can give us a call. The web page also has a great section on frequently asked questions. So these are probably the most well, these are the most common questions, but there are very detailed answers to those questions. So I would encourage that you visit that as well. All right, thanks for participating, everyone, and I hope you have a nice weekend.